You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
Erin O'Toole did a press conference this morning, and I put a question to him that I had not heard anyone ask. I've been talking about it. I have asked for an interview with Erin O'Toole's office, and I've been told, we'll get back to you, and after about a week, I think it's safe to say I am not going to get an interview at this time. But I wanted to ask about this climate plan of his that we talked about on the show last week. The too long didn't read version of it is that there is going to be a rewards program of sorts where every time you spend $1 of tax, if you will, on, well, maybe it's not tax, we'll get to that in a moment, but $1 of a surcharge on a hydrocarbon-based fuel, that money will go to a low-carbon savings account, and that savings account will let you buy green things. So government-approved expenditures like a bike or a transit pass or a Tesla or a retrofit something or other for your home. That's the shortened version of the Erin O'Toole climate plan, which has decided to pin itself to the Paris Agreement. So Trudeau's Paris targets, which he's now gone above and beyond, Erin O'Toole says he's going to meet the Paris targets, and that's the basis of the plan. Now, this comes after Erin O'Toole signed that carbon tax pledge for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation during his leadership race, in which he said unequivocally no to a carbon tax. And you may think it's a semantical discussion, and I will say in constitutional law, it's actually very relevant whether a government-imposed charge is a tax or not. But you may think it's just semantics to question whether it's a carbon tax or just a price on carbon, a regulatory charge, a levy. And the reason I think it's important is because of the integrity factor. When he says no tax and then goes and proposes a plan that will force consumers to pay more for something, that to a consumer is not going to matter. It's a tax. They're paying more for something. It's a tax. And I wanted to ask him along that vein whether he views this as a tax. The background of this being that for the last 6 years, when the Trudeau government has claimed that its carbon tax is not a tax, the Conservatives were calling it a carbon tax. They weren't buying into this whole, oh, no, it's not a price, it's just a price. They're saying, no, it's a carbon tax. So I wanted to ask Erin about that. Here was our exchange this morning.
Since 2015, the Conservatives have called Justin Trudeau's so-called price on carbon a carbon tax. The implication being that if Canadians are forced because of the government to pay more for a product, it's a tax. With regard to your climate change plan, do you concede that you are in fact allowing there to be a carbon tax? And if not, how can you not make that with what Conservatives have been saying about Trudeau's price on carbon for the last 6 years?
I put forward a plan last week that will end Mr. Trudeau's carbon tax and put forward a plan that puts consumers, Canadians, small business owners, farmers in the driver's seat. And the fact that not one penny of the price on carbon goes to Ottawa makes it not a tax. We've had some people say when you pay a deposit on a bottle and get the deposit back when you recycle the bottle, that environmental levy, that would probably be the closest comparison to this, because consumers are not giving an increasing amount of money away to Ottawa. Mr. Trudeau today is likely doubling his tax yet again to make new targets he's making up on the fly. So what we've said is Canadians deserve to know what their carbon footprint is, the price on carbon, which is a change, Andrew, yes, but that will be kept with them, and then they will be in the driver's seat with respect to lowering that carbon footprint over time. Our plan is modeled to meet our Paris targets, but more excitingly, to have stronger jobs and investment, and that's what we need after the COVID crisis.
Listen, I don't like the answer, but I will say he answered it clearly and directly, which I very much appreciate, and I know that Justin Trudeau is not interested in doing that, so he answered it clearly. I don't buy into his excuse. He said it's like the money you pay for a bottle deposit, which I think is kind of stupid in and of itself. But the difference between that money and the money that you put into your O'Toole Bucks account is that the money you spend for a bottle at the liquor store, or I think in Quebec when you just buy like a can of pop or something like that, is money that you get back as cash. When you redeem those, you can spend them on whatever you want. With the O'Toole Bucks plan, you can only spend them on government-approved expenditures. So even if that money goes into an account that is yours and has your name on it and doesn't go into general revenue, it's still money that you don't quite control as cash, which is why it's been described more as a rewards program or a points program of sort. And I think that's a bit of an issue here. Now, an interesting point is that Justin Trudeau has moved the goalpost. So Erin O'Toole has agreed to meet the Paris climate targets. Now, those targets would cut emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. And whether you like or dislike the Paris Climate Accord, I've talked about this extensively, I won't go into it too much now, it was the gold standard. The gold standard for countries around the world. It's been the gold standard for Canadian climate policy. And it's interesting that now that Erin O'Toole has said that he's going to meet those targets, Justin Trudeau has gone beyond this to say, oh, now Canada's going to go and reduce their emissions by 40 to 45%. Hey, why not go more? Joe Biden's going more today. China's going more. Everyone says they can go more. It's like an auction of sorts where everyone just keeps shouting out a number higher than what their colleagues around the world are saying. You don't actually have to do it, because the nature of these things is that they're 10, 20, 30 years down the line when your government's not going to be around to be held to account for it. But it is interesting that when Erin O'Toole does put forward a plan that he says will meet these, all of a sudden the tone shifts. Marika Walsh in the Globe and Mail, who I've always gotten along with, she's a solid reporter, but she says after repeatedly dodging questions on whether the Conservatives will support the new 40 to 45% emission reductions target, Erin O'Toole says his party will meet Canada's previous target to cut emissions by 30%. Again, so Trudeau has actually succeeded in changing the narrative just by blurting out a new number, like it's Price is Right, and now all of a sudden the one that the Conservatives had to be dragged into doing, kicking and screaming, is not good enough. And this is exactly the point. This is why I've always said Conservatives are not going to win an election on the left's turf. Conservatives are not going to win by trying to compete in areas that the left dominates. Because this is what's happening. Erin O'Toole has staked huge political capital on this. He has caused a mutiny within his own caucus and from the base of the Conservatives because he has gone along with a carbon tax. And what thanks does he get? Less than a week later, it's not enough because now the emissions goalposts have been moved and you have to come up with a plan that is going to go to 40 to 45% emissions instead of 30%. He fell for the Liberal trap, hook, line, and sinker. It's done. Now the election's going to be about, why does the Conservative plan only want to drop emissions by 30%, even if that was the one that the intellectuals of the world, that the global community agreed on, and that has driven Canadian climate policy for the last 6 years. Now it's not going to be good enough. And I'm amused by this in a way, but also angered that these things, which you can see from a mile away, are not detected by the people that are supposed to know better, the people that are supposed to be smart enough to navigate through the political terrain and come up with good policy that is going to be good for the country and also politically saleable, and they keep tripping over their own feet. If you liked watching this clip of The Andrew Lawton Show, True North has lots more for you all over at www.tnc.news.